co-founder, chairman, and the CEO of the University Industry Inovation Network that is headquartered in Amsterdam and has more than 200 members from 25 countries. That's quite an impressive organization to be heading. So a person with 3 positions in one single entity. Now is the trickiest part. Thorsten, is that the way? He looked at me, so probably it was quite close. So welcome our next speaker to the stage.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today because I can speak about one of the topics which I'm really passionate about, and that is engagement and entrepreneurship. And I think what I got from the previous presentation from Donny, I'm not sure if he's still here, he mentioned how lucky he feels to be in his position. So he said, in the beginning, people might have thought, like, how boring is academia? How can you work in academia? But I think it is what we make out of it and in which position we work. And I didn't want to do a PhD on this topic. I wanted to go into consulting in a big company, do these kind of changes. But then a professor offered me to do a PhD on the topic. And it took me 7 years, so a long PhD. But I really got into it. And in this process of doing the PhD, I realized that I don't just want to do research on the topic, I also want to see the changes being done in the universities, implement the changes, using the tools which Lina was talking about. So really making a change. And this is why I believe these kind of conferences are super important, because we have to foster this change of making universities more entrepreneurial and more engaged. So the starting point of all my presentations is that I believe that our universities can create and should create a higher economic and social impact. That's my true belief. And that belief is backed up by 2 elements, and 2 elements how we can implement this, and this is engagement and entrepreneurship, and this is what we have to foster. So my topic is how can we build a university that drives innovation? And as I was introduced, I'm working with many universities around the world, but at the same time I'm affiliated with Münster University of Applied Sciences in Germany. So if you were wondering before how a German looks, that's how a German looks. Okay. So, he mentioned that I have different positions, and that is the beauty of my job. So on one hand, I'm a professor for innovation management and business development, and I'm the deputy director of this research center, which investigates how to make these relationships work. But at the same time then, out of this center, I founded a network with a colleague of mine who's a Dutch. This is why we're based in Amsterdam. And we founded this network to bring all these universities together who have an interest to be entrepreneurial and to be engaged. So we are creating a community of like-minded people who drive the topic. And as part of this, we realized that in many universities, we have implemented small changes, but the real transformation hasn't happened in many of these universities. So we discussed, okay, how can we bring this topic to the highest level of the agenda of universities? And this is how we created an accreditation for this. There are accreditations for study programs, for quality management, for internationalization, for all these topics. But there hasn't been one on the so-called 3rd mission. So we have education, we have research, and then we have engagement and entrepreneurship as a 3rd mission. And there hasn't been one. So we thought, what could we do? Should we create a ranking? No, we don't believe that we have the right indicators, so we created an accreditation. And I want to share in my presentation a little bit on how we accredit institutions. And this gives you an indication what we believe are the building blocks of an entrepreneurial and engaged university. So it's a similar talk to what we have seen from Israel before. So this network has around about 200, a bit more than 200 members from 25 countries. So if you're interested in knowledge exchange, coming to events, to workshops and so on, please approach me. I see a couple of members here and event participants. So I'm always happy to catch up, and I believe knowledge sharing is key. So these are kind of the events which we are doing, but I want to move right into the content. Very important, I believe, is that we understand that this is not a small topic which a university has to address. It is not, let's do that in 3 months and then we work 1 semester on it. No. It is a transformation of the entire university system. It is adding a third mission to the agenda of the university. First, we had just teaching universities. Then many centuries ago, we added research. And now we are in the phase adding the third mission. It's a huge transformation, which means that we have to transform the entire university in many, many different aspects. And this is what we have to recognize. And we have to put enough emphasis and enough financial resources into it. The leadership has to change. We will discuss all these different elements in a second. The next one. So transformation processes towards an engaged university need to be based on evidence. Rather than saying, look, I believe that might work, we believe in doing research first and then basing our strategy or basing a university strategy on this evidence. So we have heard before about some research being done. And each university who wants to transform itself has to do this research. As an example, we talked about incentives before. Before you design an incentive system, try to find out what are actually the incentives which the academics want, and then offer exactly these incentives, rather than doing what you think is right. Communication is shouting, marketing is listening. So I'm coming from the Science to Business Marketing Research Center. And normally the people say, that's great marketing, the guys can create us some flyers. But the business students here, and hopefully many more, know that marketing has a different idea. The idea of marketing is that we try to understand the needs of our clients and of our partners, and students are our clients, and also the employees of a university are clients. So we want to understand these needs and then address these needs as best as we can. And that is the idea of marketing. And this is why it says marketing is listening. We first have to listen what our stakeholders want before we act. And then we can do communication. That's shouting out what our approach is. I'm speaking at a lot of conferences with a lot of people who work with patents. And the first thing what I say is, look at your patent portfolio and see it initially as a portfolio of failures. Only if you can prove that the patent has made a positive impact on the economy or on society, then you can call it a success. Not if you just registered it. That's not a success. That's a step in the process. But we are just counting how many patents has a university basically generated. And especially in technical universities, that's the main indicator, or a main indicator. And government is actually forcing us to do that. They send us tables and say, how many patents did you create? And we're happy to fill them in with 100 patents. But what happened with these patents? Has there been any impact generated from these patents? So this is why I believe that we should first of all see this portfolio as a portfolio of failures and only turn a patent into a success if we can clearly show that it made a positive contribution. So we believe in partnerships. Intellectual property can be part of these partnerships, but it doesn't have to be. Intellectual property is a tool, but what we are focusing on is creating interactions, as we have heard before, creating engagement. If we do that right, we will end up with innovation. So, often in universities, we see it like this. We develop, oh, that doesn't work. We develop a couple of projects, we do the patenting, and then we do the technology transfer. So we're trying to throw over the patent over the fence and hope that a business is catching it and hopefully paying us a lot of money. But that hardly works for universities. We always know this example of the American universities which make heaps of money with 1 or 2 patents. But if you look at 99% of the universities worldwide, they are spending much more money on patent registration and patent fees than they actually make. And this is something where we believe we are wrong. So we believe we shouldn't throw the patent over the fence here and then engage with businesses, but actually we should engage with businesses here already. We should know what the businesses want, maybe even integrate them, taking money from them, or maybe just taking the needs. Speaking to them, what do you need? Okay, we're doing our new research lines in this direction. Thanks for telling us. Speaking with the city council, what does the city council need? So taking the needs of our stakeholders into consideration. A top-down and bottom-up approach is needed. So it is not just that leadership says, now we are an entrepreneurial or engaged university, and then everything works. Clearly that doesn't work. We also need to plant the seeds and work with these individual academics who have this passion to make actually impacts. To not do some research, have a publication, put that in a drawer, do the next one. But actually do something good out of the research, out of the technologies which they have developed. And the second element is focus on drivers, not barriers. A lot of times what we focus on in universities, we are trying to lower the barriers for the academics to be entrepreneurial to the minimum. Bureaucracy, for example. I'm German, we have the most tax law in the entire world, for example. Everything is super bureaucratic. We try to reduce that to the minimum rather than creating drivers, motivating people, providing incentives, creating passion in the people. And what we have to do is exactly creating these drivers. And when you have this passion, then you also jump over the barriers. Because the next barriers come anyway. So if I just have academics which do engagement, if it's super smooth, the first problem which comes makes them stopping it. So let's rather create people who have so much passion, who jump over the barriers, and then do engagement. So we focus on the science of engagement. So my point here is we first try to understand how it works, then we apply it. And this is why it is great for me to work in a research center with around about 20 staff, researching it, and then putting it into practice in the network which we have created. So I spoke about the accreditation which we created, and I want to use this. I will move over this quite quickly. These are the people who are behind it. These are some universities which are undertaking this accreditation at the moment, worldwide, from Latin America to Australia. But what I want to focus here is, and which is very important to me, is what we want to create with this accreditation is actually a shared framework and a trusted evaluation. The problem in universities very often is that they say, look, we want to be more engaged, more entrepreneurial, but how do we start? So you make a meeting with some deans, with the board and the entrepreneurship coaches, and then everyone is sitting around the table and says like, phew. Does someone have an idea what we have to do? So we have to create these tools and frameworks as a guiding framework of our activities, and that's what we're trying to do. I'm very open with this. There are other tools. HE Innovate is a tool. There's from Carnegie Mellon, there's a community engagement classification. So it is not that this is the only thing which is existing. I think important is that the universities actually use such frameworks to foster this process, to manage this process. So and that will lead in a promotion of cultural change, organizational development, because through this process of accreditation, you're learning as well. You're self-reflecting, but also you're getting feedback. And lastly, the amplification of the recognition of excellence. So a university which goes through a process of accreditation or certification later gets a label and then can be trusted by external parties. And all this creates an impact in the university and not just lip service. Many universities say, look, we are entrepreneurial, look at our marketing material, but are they really entrepreneurial? Have they changed their entire institution? Often not. It's just the new communication is shouting, communication strategy. And I'm a true believer that we have to change our universities to be more entrepreneurial, to increase the impact. So I want to use the standards which we have in this accreditation to give you an idea of what we understand is an entrepreneurial and engaged university. And some of these standards overlap with the presentation which we heard before from Israel. So there it was 6 key elements. Here we have 15 standards. So we start with orientation and strategy. Institutional commitment is the first one. We heard before about the vision and the mission or key principles, however you call that in your institution. And then everyone has a strategy plan, 4 years, 5 years, depending on the country. There you can see if that topic is actually important to the institution. That's the written documents, vision, mission, key principles, strategy plan. And then is it actually made publicly? Is when the president or the rector of the university is speaking, are they just speaking about research, about teaching, or are they also speaking about entrepreneurship and engagement? So there needs to be a commitment and it needs to be publicly made. The second one, shared goals. So even if we make this public statement and we have the strategy, the strategy, how do we actually implement it? So how do we break it down from this strategic, long-term, more fuzzy kind of concept to what does the individual academic, what does the individual technology transfer manager, engagement manager has to do? Does the dean of one faculty know what is expected from him or her? So we have to break it down to these shared goals. Next, financial commitment, financial planning. Do we actually put the resources into this activity? And is that long-term? Is it just a European funding program and after 3 years there is no funding anymore and nobody is doing any entrepreneurship anymore? The coaching, the mentoring just disappears because the funding ran out. So are there long-term funding resources? Leadership. Are the leaders actually promoting a certain DNA or a certain characteristics of entrepreneurship? Are they fostering risk-taking? Are they good examples of entrepreneurial leaders? So look at your own university board. Who is actually there entrepreneurial? Who has these kind of entrepreneurial values? Next one, from the leaders, which influence the staff. Do we have the right staff profile? Who teaches actually entrepreneurship? Is that someone who studied, did a PhD, has never started a company, has never worked in innovation, has no practical experience? So a person who is super book smart, but not life smart, let's say. So we have to look at who is teaching our students what actually entrepreneurship is. The next element, incentives and rewards. We talked about this in the conference before, so I can make this shorter. But we have to create some certain motivation. If that is reduction in teaching, for example, the more money I get into my university, the less I have to teach. It's a good incentive for me. So in these kind of incentives which we have to create. And that doesn't always have to be financial. It can also be that there is an award for the most entrepreneurial academic at the end of the year. And a celebration where the students get the certificate, and then there's one certificate for the most entrepreneurial academic. Why not? That is an incentive. Drivers and enablers, culture. We talked about culture, about risk-taking, about failure. How is this culture actually promoted? Through communications, through events, and as we have heard before, through community. How do we build communities of entrepreneurs? How do we bring external startup founders into the university who bring the culture with them into the lecture halls, but also to the teachers and the researchers? So cultural change. Internal support structure. So what do we actually do if someone wants to be entrepreneurial? Might be a staff member, might be a student. So you have a great idea, how do you help to evaluate it? Is there a technology evaluation system? Is there mentoring? Is there an incubation space? Is there an acceleration program? So what kind of support services is the university actually offering? And then for us it's important with service alignment, we mean that a university doesn't have to provide all these services by themselves. If it's a big university, they might be able to do that, but if it's a small university, they can also partner with other organizations in their surrounding and offer this. So not every university can have their own incubator, but if they enable their students to go into the incubator of another university or of the city, it's perfectly fine. They don't have the internal support structures, but they have a service alignment. They have an alignment with an external service. And that actually contributes to the individual going through the different stages of the entrepreneurial journey and getting support at each of these stages. Education, here we come to the activities. So education, how is entrepreneurship integrated into the study programs? Is the university just creating employees for existing organizations? Or are they also promoting the career profile of an entrepreneur, of a freelancer, or of an intrapreneur? So an entrepreneurial person within an existing organization. So is the institution actually creating students which are not just following but creating and making an impact through innovation themselves? Research. Are we actually conducting research to make an impact to society and the economy? Is that research exploitable later on? Or is that just wasted? So, what is the application of this research? That is not to say that we shouldn't do basic research, very important. It's very important to have basic research and applied research. But what are the research lines, for example? What are we trying to achieve? Is there a strategy behind that? Third mission activities is what do we actually do, for example, with the research which we have created? How do we exploit the value of this research? So commercialization or valorization activities. And the last building block of these 5 different dimensions, innovation and impact. Continuous improvement, we talked about indicators before. What are we actually measuring? How do we know that what we do is working or is not working so that we can adjust? A university needs to integrate this into the quality management. And what are they measuring? Are they just counting patents and counting number of startups, or are they looking deeper and looking also qualitatively to it? Influence within the ecosystem. So we don't want to just create universities which think about themselves within the institution, but we want that they also make a positive impact in the city, into the entrepreneurship association in the country, into European associations, for example. So how does the university also contribute to other stakeholders? And last but not least, the most difficult one, impact. So how do we actually measure impact? Super difficult. We are working in science for a long time on this topic already, and we haven't really found a good way to do that. We are still measuring economic impact primarily by, we have 1,000 professors, they live in the city, they spend so much money in the city, so that it's an economic impact which the university makes. But it's not the impact which is made through innovation. So here we are still lacking some indicators, but what we want to see is examples. How does the university contribute to the water treatment in the city? How did that make a positive contribution to the people living, to the citizens? Here, I put a couple of links if you're interested in either research. Look in our research center if you're interested in professional development, so how to actually develop leadership, the leadership of the institution, how to develop academics, how to develop tech transfer professional. There's a professional development program in our university. If you're interested in events and networking, knowledge sharing, look at our network. And if you want to know more about the standards or the accreditation which we have created, please look at this website. The important point here is there's lots of great things out here. I learn every time something new. Here, coming to this university, you learn something new. I go to another university in Colombia, in the United States, and I learn something. I see things, and I think we need to share these, and we shouldn't start from the scratch, because otherwise it will take us much longer to develop more engaged and entrepreneurial institutions. Thank you very much.
All right, maybe there's another shortcut for us by asking a question, a valuable question. Thanks.
Hello, one more time. Thank you so much for presentation. It was really a pleasure to know about you, about your experience. And I made some couple of questions to you. My name is Shahzad Rahmanov, and I'm a master student in business and finance. And I have a question about the, you told about the studying process, about the universities, I mean, like, about the studying more about entrepreneurship and about the finances. There was a question, like, what do you think about getting experience from, like, bookie guys, I mean, from the university stuff, and getting experience from the real entrepreneur, like self-made entrepreneur, which is more effective?
I think it's a combination. If we would say throw all the professors out of the university and we just teach entrepreneurship by the practitioners, we will lose depth and we will lose maybe learning some tools and methods and understanding what is behind these tools and methods. So I think there is a huge value in the science behind it. But at the same time, we have to bring in the practitioners.
Okay.
If we just learn it from books, we don't know how to apply. We have to learn from failure of other people.
Sure.
It is important that we fail quickly and fail cheaply. And getting advice from real entrepreneurs is crucial in this.
Yeah, there is but kind of dilemma, I can say, while we are getting some experience from the professors, and while we were like applying this, there is another answer for the same question that we're like asking from ourselves. For example, like some teachers, they're giving some experience that they based on this, but we're applying this exactly this case to the another process, but it's not working. I'm really curious about that. For that purpose, I'm asking this question.
You're applying then the theoretical knowledge to practice, and
Yes.
that doesn't work?
Yes.
Okay, so sometimes what we also see is that the professors
Yes,
teach it
please.
in a very sophisticated way, and then the business person comes in and says like, look, that is super sophisticated, this is what we do. We do it much simpler. Which then the professor says like, yeah, but that's not how I taught you.
Yeah.
But that is like, okay, if you study for an exam, do it how the professor does it. But if you want to learn it from for real life, I think the entrepreneur gives you a good deal of information on what is actually needed. Mm-hmm. I mean, we also over-engineer in science quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And in practice, you have to deal faster. You make financial plans not as sophisticated as you learn in theory, but you don't have time because a client is waiting, so you do that a bit quicker. Mm-hmm. So I think that's yeah, I clearly see the mismatch between, okay, academia and practice.
Yeah.
And I mean, some people even say, if you want to be an entrepreneur, don't go to university. There you don't learn anything about entrepreneurship. You can learn much better in just starting your own company.
Yes.
But I think it's
All right, so we have some more questions, or?
There was one more question.
Yeah,
like,
quickly, yeah, if
this
possible.
is really quick. Can you comment on these things? Like a lot of like social media guys, for example, Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, yes, if you know about him. He's saying like you have to drop the school. What do you think about this? Because you know, like you have made PhD in 7 years. You have studied a lot. I'm just asking only your opinion. Do you agree with this statement, like dropping the school and getting the business by yourself?
I think, so from my personal experience, I started my companies whilst doing the PhD. This is why the PhD took 7 years. So, and I failed with 2 companies before. And these are very important learning experiences. But from my experience, I needed to have this scientific and theoretical knowledge to actually create these companies, because they were also knowledge-intensive companies to some degree. So I would not have quit. The next is I'm a quite risk-averse person. I'm German, we are very risk-averse. So if I would fail with my companies, what kind of job could I still get? And I love to have my own organizations next to my professorship. I have the security of academia and still can do my entrepreneurial, let's say, ventures. So for me, this was very important. Then you have other people who say like, okay, I drop out, I go into the industry as quick as possible.
All right, so we got your personal approach, risk awareness, all right. We have a next question.
So I have a rather jokey question. Let's come back for 160 years ago to the lab by Faraday that worked at electricity research. And he was asked by the Prime Minister of England, what is the output of your research? Why do you need it? And he said, I don't know. What could be your reply to Faraday? Thank you.
You're touching the problem of that sometimes you don't know yet the application of the technology. And I think it is important that we also have this kind of research, but not only this. So we have to balance it. We shouldn't just blame basic research and say, look, if there is no application already foreseen, don't do it. And we shouldn't glorify applied research, but also not the other way around. So this academic freedom, for example, everyone can do what everyone wants. Yeah, but are we then creating a system which is really contributing to the economy and to society? Or are we having a system which is actually not, let's say, ready to maximize these impacts? So I think both is important, and we need to find the balance, and every university will do that. There is one university, for example, in the UK, in Birmingham, and they transformed themselves a little bit, not a little bit, quite a lot into applied research, and they just did applied research. And then 5 years later, they found out, well, we lost all the knowledge on basic research. So in the next 5 years, we don't have any knowledge coming into the pipeline of applied research. And then they added basic research again, because it's important to understand the process from basic research to applied research to innovation.
Okay, so we have a question by Alex.
Thank you. I'm fascinated by your passion about this topic. And I'll catch up later with you about certifying a learning in action idea. But, well, it has to do with that. It's like, well, it's a similar question. You know, when they asked Henry Ford, you know, if he had asked his customers, and he would say, well, they would have asked for faster horses. Yeah. So there's always the question about imagining what could be and designing for who we are going to be as a society in the future. So we don't know that we want it, but there's somebody who can actually see that there's a need in the future that we will want. What's your thought about that?
I believe here, if we go back to science and what kind of methods we have today, we can go beyond this statement of Henry Ford. Or if you look at Steve Jobs, who said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. It's a kind of similar statement. I believe what we have to understand is that people can't express their needs clearly. Yes, Henry Ford, the example. So what kind of tools can we use, what kind of methods can we use to identify latent needs, which the people can't express, but they are there? And maybe some of you have heard about the method outcome-driven innovation. It's in the book, What Customers Want, from Anthony Ulwick. It was published in 2005, roundabout. And they look at how can we identify these latent needs. The consumers shouldn't define the solution. We just want to know what needs they have, and what needs specifically which they can't express at this moment of time. And from a business perspective, if we identify these needs, we have a huge advantage over competition. Because if the consumers can express their need, other companies will know that as well. If we can identify the latent needs, the hidden needs, then we have a competitive advantage over the other companies. So there are tools who are focusing, or methods like outcome-driven innovation, who focus on latent needs rather than the obvious ones. And I think we as entrepreneurs have to go into this. I'm teaching this method as well with my students, because otherwise it's too easy for competitors to copy what you are doing.